In a big, lively city, there was a hospital that everyone talked about. It wasn't just any hospital, it had shiny glass doors, the latest machines, and doctors who were known for their skill. People traveled from far away to get treated there. Among these doctors was a man who worked as a gynecologist. He was good at his job but carried something heavy with him, an oversized ego. This doctor thought he knew everything and often acted like he was better than others. His name isn't important here, but what he did one day would change his life forever. One Monday morning, a young black woman walked into the hospital. She looked calm and confident, dressed neatly in a simple blouse and skirt. Her steps were steady, but her heart was beating fast because she wasn't feeling well. She had been having some discomfort during her pregnancy, so her regular doctor sent her to this place for a checkup. The receptionist smiled warmly and directed her to the gynecologist's office. When the woman entered the room, the doctor barely glanced up from his papers. He took one look at her and immediately formed an opinion, without even asking her name or listening to why she was there. In his mind, he decided she didn't belong in a fancy hospital like this one. Without thinking twice, he started making comments under his breath. "Public clinics are free, you know," he said sarcastically, not bothering to hide his smirk. Then came more remarks, each one sharper than the last. He joked about her clothes, her accent, and even guessed incorrectly about where she lived. The woman sat quietly, trying hard not to let his words hurt her. But inside she felt small, like she didn't matter. Still, she stayed polite. She explained her symptoms clearly, hoping he'd focus on helping her instead of judging her. But the doctor wasn't interested. Every time she spoke, he interrupted her or rolled his eyes. By the end of the appointment, she left feeling worse than when she arrived, not because of her health, but because of how she was treated. What the doctor didn't realize was that this woman wasn't just another patient. She was someone who deserved respect, kindness, and care, and she wasn't alone either. When she stepped out of the hospital, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number. On the other end of the line was her husband, a man who had built his success through hard work and determination. He owned many businesses around the city, including the very hospital where the rude doctor worked. As the woman told her husband what happened, her voice trembled with emotion. She described every detail, the mocking tone, the dismissive attitude, and the way the doctor refused to take her seriously. Her husband listened carefully, his face growing darker with anger. Though he wanted to storm into the hospital right then and demand answers, he knew better. They needed a plan, one that would hold the doctor accountable without causing unnecessary drama. By the time the call ended, both of them agreed on one thing. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about standing up for all the patients who might face similar treatment in the future. Something had to change, and they were going to make sure it did. Little did the doctor know his days of acting superior were numbered. The next morning, the woman's husband woke up with a clear purpose. He wasn't the type to sit back and let things slide, especially when it came to protecting his family or standing up for what was right. After getting ready, he made a few phone calls. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke to people who worked under him. "I need to meet with the hospital administrator today," he said. "It's urgent." Within hours, he arrived at the hospital, dressed in a sharp suit that made heads turn. Employees whispered among themselves, wondering why such an important figure had shown up unannounced. The truth was, most of them didn't even know he existed. To them, the hospital was just a place where they clocked in and out every day. None of them realized it was part of a larger network owned by this man, the same man who now walked through the halls like he owned the place, because he did. He headed straight to the administrator's office, bypassing the usual formalities. When he entered, the administrator stood up quickly, startled but trying to appear composed. "Sir, we weren't expecting you," he stammered. The owner nodded, cutting straight to the point. "There's something I need to discuss," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's about one of your staff members." For the next hour, the two men talked behind closed doors. The owner laid out everything, how a patient had been treated unfairly, how her concerns were ignored, and how she was mocked simply because of how she looked. He didn't mention his personal connection to the case. Instead, he framed it as a matter of professionalism and ethics. "This kind of behavior can't happen here," he said firmly. "Not on my watch." Meanwhile, the doctor who had caused all this trouble went about his day completely unaware of the storm brewing around him. He strutted through the corridors, chatting casually with nurses and cracking jokes that only made him seem more arrogant. If anyone noticed the tension in the air, they didn't say anything to him. Perhaps they thought it was better to keep quiet. For now. Back in the administrator's office, the owner pushed for action. "We can't wait weeks or months to deal with this," he insisted. "If word gets out that we tolerate discrimination, it'll ruin the hospital's reputation. Is that what you want?" The administrator shook his head nervously. "No, of course not." That's when the owner suggested sending in an inspection team to observe how staff interacted with patients. It wouldn't be obvious. It would look like a routine check. But the real goal was to gather evidence against the problematic doctor. Later that afternoon, the woman returned to the hospital, not as a patient this time, but as part of the inspection team. Walking beside her husband, she felt a mix of emotions: nervousness, determination, and a flicker of hope. Together, they moved through the building, watching closely as doctors and nurses went about their work. They paid special attention to the gynecology department, observing how patients were treated during consultations. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. The rude doctor wasn't just difficult with the woman who had complained. He acted the same way with other minority patients too. He rolled his eyes when a young Latina mother asked too many questions. He sighed loudly when an elderly Asian woman struggled to explain her symptoms in broken English. Each interaction was laced with impatience and disrespect, as if he believed these patients were wasting his time, but the doctor remained oblivious to the scrutiny. In fact, he seemed prouder than ever, boasting to colleagues about how busy he was and how much the hospital relied on him. "They'd fall apart without me," he joked during lunch, earning a few forced laughs from co-workers who secretly resented his attitude. None of them dared to speak up, though. Not yet. By the end of the day, the inspection team had gathered enough information to paint a damning picture. The owner reviewed the findings with a heavy heart. He hated seeing proof of such behavior within an institution he cared deeply about, but he also knew this was an opportunity, a chance to root out toxicity and create a safer, more welcoming environment for everyone. As the sun set over the city, plans began to take shape. The owner called another meeting, this time including senior staff and representatives from the board. He wanted everyone involved to understand the seriousness of the situation. "Change starts at the top," he told them, "and if we don't act now, nothing will improve." Unbeknownst to the doctor, his days at the hospital were numbered. What he thought was just another ordinary week was about to become anything but. And while he continued walking around like he owned the place, the real owner was preparing to teach him a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. The following morning, the hospital buzzed with an unusual energy. Whispers filled the hallways as employees exchanged knowing glances. Something was happening, something big, but no one could quite put their finger on it. The inspection team had been discreet, but word travels fast in places like this. Nurses leaned close to each other during breaks, speculating about why the bosses were suddenly paying so much attention. Some thought layoffs were coming. Others wondered if someone important had complained. In the middle of all this, the rude doctor carried on as if nothing was wrong. He breezed through his appointments, still treating patients with the same dismissive attitude that had gotten him into trouble in the first place. When a patient hesitated to answer his questions, he tapped his pen impatiently and muttered under his breath. If someone asked for clarification, he acted like they were wasting his precious time. To him, these people weren't individuals. They were just names on a chart, problems to solve before moving on to the next. What he didn't realize was that every move he made was being watched. The inspection team wasn't just observing casually. They were taking detailed notes, documenting every interaction. The woman who had initially complained walked alongside her husband, blending in with the group. She listened carefully as nurses and receptionists shared stories about how the doctor treated them too. Not just patients, but colleagues as well. One nurse admitted she dreaded working with him because of his constant criticism. Another said he once snapped at her in front of a patient leaving her humiliated. As the day wore on, the evidence piled up. Conversations were recorded with permission, observations were noted, and patterns emerged. It became clear that this wasn't just a case of one bad day or a misunderstanding. It was a pattern of behavior. The doctor's arrogance wasn't limited to minority patients. It bled into how he treated everyone around him. Yet, it was undeniable that those from marginalized backgrounds bore the brunt of his disrespect. Later that afternoon, the owner called another meeting. This time, it wasn't just senior staff. It included representatives from the board, legal advisors, and even a few key members of the medical team. The room was tense as everyone took their seats. Papers rustled, pens clicked, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. When the owner stood up to speak, the room fell silent. "This isn't easy," he began, his voice steady but serious. "We pride ourselves on providing top-notch care to everyone who walks through our doors, but recent events have shown us that we're falling short. Not everywhere, but in specific areas." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I've seen firsthand how some patients are treated differently based on their race, income level, or even the way they speak. That's unacceptable, and it stops now." He went on to explain what the inspection team had uncovered, carefully avoiding naming anyone outright until the official investigation was complete. Still, it was obvious who he was talking about. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs while others nodded in agreement. No one spoke up to defend the doctor, not even those who worked closely with him. Maybe they were afraid, or maybe they'd silently resented him all along. When the meeting ended, the administrator approached the owner privately. "What do you want me to do?" he asked nervously. The owner's response was firm. "Handle, and suspend him immediately pending further review. Let the staff know this isn't personal, it's about setting a standard. If we tolerate behavior like this, we lose credibility. And trust me, the public won't forgive us." Word spread quickly after that. By late afternoon, the doctor was summoned to the administrator's office. At first, he strutted in confidently, assuming it was another routine discussion about schedules or budgets. But when he saw the grave expressions on their faces, his confidence wavered. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his tone dripping with false concern. The administrator wasted no time. "We've received multiple complaints about your conduct," he said bluntly. "Until we can investigate further, you're suspended effective immediately." The doctor's face turned red with anger. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. "You have no idea what you're doing. I'm the best gynecologist here." But his protests fell flat. The administrator remained calm, handing over a letter detailing the suspension. "You'll hear from us soon," he said simply. As the doctor stormed out of the office, fuming and muttering, under his breath, the administrator let out a long sigh. It wasn't easy confronting someone like that, but it had to be done. Back in the main lobby, the woman and her husband stood quietly, watching as the drama unfolded. They didn't need to say anything. Their presence alone sent a powerful message. Change was coming, and it wouldn't stop with one person. This was just the beginning. By evening, news of the suspension rippled through the hospital. Employees whispered among themselves, some relieved, others shocked. The rude doctor's absence left a void, but also an opportunity. For the first time in years, there was hope that things might actually improve. And for the woman who had sparked it all, justice felt closer than ever. The days that followed the doctor's suspension felt like a turning point for the hospital. The atmosphere shifted in subtle but noticeable ways. Staff members who had previously kept their heads down started walking a little taller, as if they could finally breathe easier. Conversations in the break room took on a different tone. Less fear, more hope. Nurses joked about how quiet the hall seemed without the doctor's sharp remarks echoing through them. Even patients seemed to sense the change. Some mentioned feeling more comfortable during their visits, but not everyone was happy. A small group of doctors and administrators grumbled behind closed doors, accusing the owner of overreacting. "He's just one man," one of them muttered during a hushed meeting. "Why make such a big deal out of this?" Another chimed, If we start punishing people for every rude comment, half the staff will be gone by next week. Their complaints were predictable. They didn't want to rock the boat or admit that there might be deeper issues within the system. Meanwhile, the suspended doctor wasn't taking his punishment lightly. He spent hours pacing around his house, replaying the scene in the administrator's office over and over in his mind. How dare they suspend him? He was the best at what he did, or so he told himself. His ego refused to let him see the truth. Instead, he convinced himself that this was all a conspiracy, a personal attack orchestrated by someone jealous of his success. His anger boiled over when he called a few close friends from the medical field, ranting about how unfair everything was. They're trying to destroy my career, he fumed. All because of one patient's exaggerated story. It's ridiculous. His friends listened politely but offered little support. Deep down, many of them knew he had brought this on himself. Still, none of them dared to say it outright. Not yet. Back at the hospital, the owner wasn't wasting any time. He knew suspending the doctor was only the first step. Real change required action, bold, meaningful action. So he gathered a team of trusted advisors to brainstorm ideas. They met in a conference room late into the evening, surrounded by whiteboards filled with notes and plans. One idea stood out: mandatory diversity training for all staff. It's not enough to punish bad behavior, the owner explained. We need to teach people how to do better. This isn't just about avoiding lawsuits, it's about creating a culture where everyone feels respected. The team agreed, adding suggestions like workshops on empathy, seminars on cultural sensitivity, and even role-playing exercises to help staff practice difficult conversations. While these discussions were happening, the woman who had sparked it all continued visiting the hospital, not as part of the inspection team anymore, but as a patient. Her pregnancy was progressing and she needed regular checkups. Each visit felt different now. The staff treated her with warmth and care, going out of their way to ensure she felt comfortable. One nurse even stayed late to answer her questions, explaining things in simple terms until she fully understood. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not as a stereotype, but as a human being. Her husband noticed the difference too. During one of their drives home, he turned to her and said, "You know, this is what we were fighting for. Not revenge, but respect." She nodded, smiling softly. "It's not perfect yet," she replied, "but it's a start." As the weeks passed, news of the hospital's new initiative spread beyond its walls. Local newspapers picked up the story, praising the owner for taking a stand against discrimination. Social media lit up with comments from former patients, sharing their own experiences, both good and bad, at the hospital. Some thanked the administration for finally addressing long-standing issues, while others urged them to keep pushing for progress. Not surprisingly, the suspended doctor saw these updates and grew angrier. He began posting online under anonymous accounts, ranting about how the hospital was caving to political correctness and claiming he was being punished for simply speaking his mind. But his arguments fell flat. Most readers saw through his excuses, pointing out that treating people with kindness and respect wasn't political. It was basic human decency. Inside the hospital, things were moving forward. The diversity training sessions kicked off with a bang. Experts from outside organizations led interactive workshops encouraging staff to share their thoughts and ask tough questions. At first, some participants hesitated, afraid of saying the wrong thing. But as the sessions went on, barriers began to break down. People opened up about their fears, biases, and misunderstandings, realizing they weren't alone. One particularly powerful moment came when a senior nurse shared her own experience of being treated poorly early in her career. "I used to think it was just part of the job," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But looking back, I realize it shaped how I treat others today. If I can learn to do better, anyone can." The room erupted in applause, a sign that hearts were beginning to change. Outside the hospital, the woman and her husband kept a low profile, focusing on their lives while staying updated on the progress. They didn't seek recognition or praise. Their goal had always been to create a safer, kinder environment for everyone. Still, They couldn't help but feel proud of what they'd accomplished together. For the suspended doctor, however, life grew increasingly difficult. With each passing day, his attempts to defend himself only made him look worse. Former colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone whose reputation had crumbled so publicly. Job applications went unanswered, interviews ended abruptly, and slowly but surely, he found himself isolated, a stark contrast to the confidence he once exuded. And though justice had been served in many ways, the woman often reminded herself that this wasn't about one person's downfall. It was about building something better, for herself, for her unborn child, and for countless others who deserved to walk into a hospital without fear of judgment or disrespect. The journey wasn't over, but every step forward felt like a victory worth celebrating. As the weeks turned into months, the hospital began to transform in ways that no one could have predicted. The diversity training sessions weren't just ticking boxes, they were sparking real conversations. Staff members who had once avoided eye contact or kept their thoughts to themselves now gathered in small groups during breaks, sharing stories and learning from each other. Some admitted they'd made mistakes in the past. Others confessed they hadn't realized how their words or actions might affect someone else. It wasn't easy, but it was honest, and that honesty became the foundation for change. One afternoon, a young receptionist approached the administrator with an idea. "What if we started a support group for patients?" she suggested timidly. "You know, a safe space where people can talk about their experiences, good or bad, and feel heard." The administrator listened thoughtfully before nodding. "That's a great idea," he said. "Let's make it happen." Within days, flyers appeared around the hospital announcing the new initiative, Patient Voices Matter. The first meeting drew only a handful of attendees, but those who came spoke openly about their struggles. Long waits, confusing medical jargon, and yes, moments when they felt dismissed or disrespected. What surprised everyone was how willing the staff was to listen. Nurses, doctors, and even janitors sat alongside patients, taking notes and asking questions. By the end of the session, tears had been shed, hugs exchanged, and promises made to do better. The woman who had sparked this chain reaction attended one of these meetings too. She didn't speak much at first, content to observe and soak in the atmosphere. But when another patient, a young mother struggling with postpartum depression, broke down while describing her experience, the woman reached out instinctively. "You're not alone," she said softly. "We're here for you." Her words resonated deeply not just with the young mother but with everyone in the room. Slowly, the woman began opening up about her own journey. The day she walked into the hospital feeling scared and vulnerable, the way the rude doctor had treated her, and how standing up for herself had led to something bigger than she ever imagined. Her story inspired others to share theirs, creating a ripple effect of courage and connection. Meanwhile, the suspended doctor found himself increasingly irrelevant. His attempts to clear his name fell flat, and his online rants grew more desperate and unhinged. Former colleagues stopped responding to his messages, and friends distanced themselves, embarrassed by his inability to take responsibility for his actions. Job offers dried up entirely, leaving him with plenty of time to stew in his anger. At first he blamed everyone else, the hospital, the owner, even the patient who had complained. But as the silence stretched on, cracks began to form in his armor of denial. Late one night, sitting alone in his dimly lit living room, he stumbled upon an article about the hospital's transformation. Photos showed smiling patients, engaged staff, and testimonials praising the institution's newfound commitment to inclusivity and care. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Was it possible he'd been wrong? Had he really treated people so poorly that they felt the need to overhaul an entire system? He shook his head, dismissing the thought almost immediately. No, he told himself. They were overreacting. He was fine the way he was, but deep down, seeds of uncertainty had been planted. Over the next few days, memories surfaced, moments he'd brushed off at the time but now seemed glaringly inappropriate. Like the elderly woman he'd snapped at for asking too many questions, or the teenager he'd mocked for being nervous during her first exam. These flashes of reflection gnawed at him, though he refused to admit it to anyone, not even himself. Back at the hospital, progress continued. The owner introduced a mentorship program pairing experienced staff with newcomers to foster collaboration and understanding. He also launched a feedback system allowing patients to rate their experiences anonymously, ensuring concerns could be addressed promptly. Slowly but surely, the toxic culture that had festered under the surface began to fade, replaced by a spirit of accountability and compassion. One particularly touching moment came during a staff meeting when a nurse stood up to share her gratitude. "I used to dread coming to work," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But now I feel like I'm part of something important, something meaningful." Her words brought applause from the room, a testament to how far they'd come. Outside, the hospital walls, news of its transformation spread far and wide. Other institutions reached out, eager to learn from their example. Local leaders praised the owner for his leadership, calling the hospital a model for what healthcare should look like, not just clinically excellent, but genuinely caring. Even critics softened their stance, acknowledging that change, though difficult, was possible when guided by integrity and purpose. For the woman and her husband, life settled into a rhythm of quiet satisfaction. They didn't seek recognition or fame. Their reward lay in knowing they'd played a role in making things better. Still, there were moments when the weight of it all hit them, like when the woman received a handwritten note from a patient thanking her for speaking up, or when her husband overheard staff members discussing how much happier they felt at work, and then there was the baby. As her pregnancy progressed, the woman found herself imagining the kind of world she wanted her child to grow up in, a world where kindness mattered more than ego, where respect wasn't reserved for a select few, and where standing up for what was right could spark waves of positive change. Each kick from within reminded her why she'd fought so hard, not just for herself but for future generations. While the hospital thrived, the suspended doctor remained stuck in his bitterness. Though he occasionally applied for jobs elsewhere, rejection after rejection left him defeated. Eventually, he retreated further into isolation, spending hours scrolling through old photos and reminiscing about the days when he believed he was untouchable. Yet buried beneath layers of pride and resentment, a faint glimmer of self-awareness lingered. Whether it would ever lead to true growth remained to be seen, but for now, the hospital moved forward without him, stronger and more united than ever. The hospital continued to evolve, becoming a place where people didn't just come for treatment, they came for hope. The changes weren't flashy or dramatic. They were small, but meaningful adjustments that added up over time. For instance, the waiting area was redesigned with softer lighting and comfortable chairs. Posters featuring diverse faces now adorned the walls, sending a clear message. Everyone belonged here. Even the language used in pamphlets and forms became simpler, ensuring no one felt confused or excluded. One morning, a new policy went into effect. Every patient would be greeted personally by a staff member within 5 minutes of arriving. At first, some employees resisted, thinking it was unnecessary. "What difference does it make?" one nurse muttered under her breath during a team meeting. But as the days passed, something remarkable happened. Patients started smiling more. They lingered longer at the front desk, asking questions or sharing bits of their lives. Conversations grew warmer, and trust began to build. Not just between patients and doctors, but among everyone who walked through the doors. The woman noticed these shifts during her visits. She'd always been treated kindly since the rude doctor's suspension, but now there was an extra layer of care. During one checkup, a midwife spent nearly 20 minutes explaining prenatal vitamins in detail, patiently answering every question without rushing. When the session ended, the midwife handed her a handwritten note that read, "You've got this, Mama." It was such a simple gesture, yet it brought tears to her eyes. For the first time, she truly believed she did have this, because she wasn't alone anymore. Her husband saw the transformation too. On weekends, he often accompanied her to appointments, observing how the staff interacted not only with her but with others. He noticed how a receptionist bent down to speak softly to a child clutching his mother's hand. calming the boy's nerves before a procedure. He watched as a janitor stopped mopping to help an elderly man find the restroom, guiding him gently like he was family. These moments might have seemed minor, but together, they painted a picture of a community working towards something greater than itself. Meanwhile, the suspended doctor struggled to find his footing. His attempts to re-enter the medical field hit dead end after dead end. Hospitals turned him away, citing concerns about cultural fit or vague references to past behavior. Each rejection stung worse than the last, chipping away at what little confidence remained. Desperation crept in, leading him to apply for positions far below his qualifications: clinic jobs, research assistant roles, even administrative work. Yet nothing panned out. To cope, he threw himself into hobbies he hadn't touched in years: gardening, painting, and reading books he'd long ignored on his shelves. At first, these activities provided a fleeting distraction, but soon they sparked unexpected introspection. One evening, while flipping through a novel about forgiveness, he paused at a passage describing how guilt can either consume you or teach you. The words lingered in his mind long after he set the book aside. Was he guilty? And if so, what had he learned? He wrestled with these thoughts late into the night, pacing his empty apartment. Memories of patients' faces haunted him. The ones he'd dismissed, mocked, or belittled. Try as he might to push them away, they refused to fade. Slowly, painfully, he began to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't been the perfect doctor he'd always imagined himself to be. Maybe he'd hurt people. The realization was bitter, almost unbearable, but also unavoidable. Back at the hospital, life moved forward. The owner announced another initiative: scholarships for aspiring healthcare workers from underserved communities. "We need more voices in medicine," he told the staff during a town hall meeting. "Voices that reflect the diversity of our patients. If we want to create lasting change, we have to invest in the future." Applause erupted, followed by murmurs of excitement. Some employees volunteered to mentor scholarship recipients, eager to pay it forward. As word of the program spread, applications poured in from across the city. Among the hopefuls was a young woman whose story stood out. Raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, she dreamed of becoming a doctor since childhood. Her essay described the day her brother fell ill and the kindness of the nurse who stayed late to explain his diagnosis. "That moment changed my life," she wrote. "It showed me what healthcare could and should be." When the scholarship winners were announced, the young woman was among them. On her first day at the hospital, she shadowed a senior doctor who took time to answer all her questions, encouraging her to speak up whenever she didn't understand something. By the end of the week, she already felt like part of the team, a sharp contrast to the stories she'd heard about other institutions where newcomers were often left to fend for themselves. For the woman expecting a baby, milestones kept coming. Her due date approached, bringing both excitement and nerves. During her final appointment, the midwife handed her a gift, a tiny knitted blanket made by volunteers from the hospital's sewing club. "A little reminder that we're with you every step of the way," the midwife said with a smile. This time the woman couldn't hold back her tears. She hugged the blanket close, feeling overwhelmed by gratitude. Her husband, standing nearby, wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You've done so much good," he whispered, "not just for yourself, but for everyone here." She nodded, leaning into him. "And we're just getting started," she replied softly. Change, however, isn't linear. There were still challenges, days when old habits resurfaced or when tensions flared among staff members. Not everyone adapted easily to the new culture, and some grumbled about the constant emphasis on inclusivity. But progress doesn't mean perfection. It means moving forward despite setbacks. And move forward they did, step by step. As for the suspended doctor, he remained adrift, unsure of what lay ahead. Yet buried beneath layers of regret and anger, a flicker of hope stirred. Perhaps someday, he thought, he could find redemption, not by returning to the career he once loved, but by learning to see others differently. Until then, the hospital carried on without him, stronger and more united than ever, proving that even the hardest battles could lead to beautiful victories. As the hospital continued to grow and improve, its reputation reached far beyond the city limits. Word spread about the warm, welcoming environment where patients felt valued and respected. People traveled from neighboring towns and even other states to experience care that wasn't just clinical but deeply human. Social media played a big role too. Photos of smiling staff members, heartfelt testimonials from patients, and videos showcasing the hospital's initiatives went viral. One post in particular caught fire, a short clip of a nurse singing softly to calm a frightened child during an exam. The video racked up millions of views with comments praising the hospital for prioritizing kindness alongside medical expertise. The owner watched all this unfold with quiet pride. He hadn't set out to make headlines or become some kind of hero. He simply wanted to fix what was broken. But seeing the impact of their efforts, the lives touched, the trust rebuilt, filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Still, he knew better than to rest on his laurels. Change wasn't something you achieved once and then forgot about. It required constant attention, like tending to a garden so weeds didn't creep back in. One day he decided to host an open forum where anyone could share their thoughts about the hospital's progress. Employees, patients, and even visitors were invited to speak freely without fear of judgment. The event drew a large crowd, filling the auditorium to capacity. Some came ready to praise, while others had constructive criticism. A teenage girl stood up to thank the staff for making her feel comfortable during a difficult surgery recovery. An older man expressed frustration about parking issues, prompting laughter from the audience. Each voice mattered, and each suggestion was noted carefully. Amidst the speakers was the young woman who had received one of the scholarships. Clutching the microphone nervously, she shared how much the program meant to her. Before this, I thought someone like me would never belong in a place like this, she said, her voice trembling but steady. But now I see that we're building something bigger than ourselves, a future where everyone has a seat at the table. Her words brought the room to applause, leaving many wiping away tears. Outside the hospital walls, life carried on as usual, or so it seemed. For the suspended doctor, days blurred together in a haze of loneliness and regret. His attempts to rebuild his career had failed completely, leaving him adrift in a world that no longer seemed interested in him. Desperation led him to odd jobs, delivering packages, stocking shelves, anything to keep busy, but none provided the fulfillment medicine once had. Nights were hardest, spent staring at the ceiling, replaying memories he wished he could erase. Yet, buried beneath layers of bitterness, tiny sparks of reflection began to glow brighter. While cleaning out his attic one afternoon, he stumbled upon old photo albums filled with pictures from his early days as a doctor. There he was, younger and full of promise, surrounded by colleagues and patients alike. Back then, he'd genuinely cared about helping people, or at least he thought he had. Somewhere along the way, that passion had been replaced by arrogance and entitlement. How had he let that happen? He sat amidst dusty boxes, flipping through pages until one image stopped him cold. It showed him standing beside a young mother holding her newborn baby. Their smiles radiated joy, gratitude, and connection, the very things missing from his recent interactions. For the first time in months, tears welled up in his eyes. Not tears of anger or self-pity, but of loss. He realized he missed being part of moments like that. More importantly, he missed being someone worthy of them. Back at the hospital, preparations buzzed for an upcoming celebration marking the institution's transformation. Flyers announced it as a day of gratitude, inviting everyone who'd contributed to the journey thus far. Food trucks lined the parking lot, live music filled the air, and colorful banners hung across the entrance. Staff wore custom t-shirts, emblazoned with the slogan, "Care that counts," while volunteers handed out flowers to arriving guests. It was more than just a party. It was a testament to resilience, unity, and hope. During the event, the owner took the stage to deliver a speech. He thanked the staff for their hard work, the patients for their patience, and the community for its support. Then, turning serious, he addressed the elephant in the room. "We've come a long way," he admitted. "But let's not pretend. It was easy. We faced challenges, made mistakes, and sometimes stumbled. What matters is that we kept going because giving up wasn't an option." His words resonated deeply, earning cheers and applause. As he stepped down, the woman who had sparked it all stepped forward. Holding her growing belly, she spoke briefly but powerfully. "This isn't just my story or your story," she said, looking out at the crowd. "It's our story. Together, we proved that standing up for what's right can lead to real change. Let's keep fighting for a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued." Her husband stood nearby, beaming with pride as the audience erupted into applause. When the speeches ended, festivities continued late into the evening. Laughter echoed through the halls, mingling with the scent of barbecue and fresh blooms. Strangers introduced themselves, sharing stories and forging connections that would last long after the day ended. For the suspended doctor, news of the celebration arrived via social media posts flooding his feed. At first, he scrolled past them angrily, unwilling to confront reminders of everything he'd lost. But eventually, curiosity got the better of him. Clicking on photos and videos, he saw faces, glowing with happiness, faces he used to know, faces he might never see again. Slowly, painfully, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what he'd done and what he still could do. That night, sitting alone in his dimly lit apartment, he picked up a pen and began writing. Words flowed hesitantly at first, then steadily, pouring onto the page like water breaking through a dam. By morning, he had drafted a letter, an apology, a confession, and a plea for understanding. Whether it would ever reach the right hands remained uncertain, but for the first time in months he felt a flicker of hope. Redemption wasn't guaranteed, but maybe, just maybe, it was possible. And if it was, he owed it to himself and to the world to try. The letter sat on the kitchen counter for days, untouched but never far from his mind. Each time he passed it, his stomach tightened with a mix of fear and determination. Writing it had been hard. Putting his flaws into words felt like exposing raw wounds, but sending it, that was another battle entirely. He knew there were no guarantees. The hospital might ignore him or worse, dismiss him outright. But something inside whispered that staying silent would only deepen the hole he dug for himself. Finally, one rainy afternoon, he mustered the courage to mail it. Addressed simply to the hospital administration, the envelope contained not just the letter, but also a piece of his soul. In it, he admitted his mistakes without excuses, acknowledged the harm he'd caused, and expressed a genuine desire to make amends. It wasn't perfect. He doubted anything could fully capture the weight of his regret, but it was honest. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of peace, however fragile. At the hospital, life continued its steady rhythm of progress and purpose. The celebration had left everyone energized, reminding them why they'd fought so hard for change. Staff members greeted each other with renewed enthusiasm, while patients noticed an even deeper level of care during their visits. Even small gestures carried meaning now. A warm smile, a reassuring touch, a moment taken to listen, all signs of a culture rooted in compassion. Then one morning, the administrator's assistant handed him a plain white envelope. "This came, and yesterday," she said casually before returning to her desk. Curious, the administrator opened it and began reading. His brow furrowed as he absorbed the contents, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise and finally to contemplation. When he finished, he sat back in his chair, staring at the page as if seeing it for the first time. The letter didn't ask for forgiveness or reinstatement. It merely laid bare the writer's remorse and offered gratitude for the lessons learned, however painfully. The administrator felt conflicted. On one hand, this man's actions had caused real damage. Trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. On the other hand, the sincerity of the apology was undeniable. After a long pause, he decided to share it with the owner. When the owner read the letter, he too was struck by its honesty. "What do you think we should do?" the administrator asked cautiously. The owner leaned back, tapping his fingers against the desk. We can't erase what happened, he said slowly. But maybe this is a chance to show him, and everyone else, that growth is possible. Meanwhile, the woman who had sparked the transformation prepared for the arrival of her baby. Her due date loomed closer with each passing day, bringing excitement and nerves in equal measure. During one of her final checkups, the midwife handed her a journal. "Write down your thoughts," she suggested gently. "It'll help you process everything." At first, the woman hesitated. Writing wasn't something she did often. But late one night, unable to sleep, she picked up the pen and began. She wrote about the day she walked into the hospital feeling scared and unseen. She described the doctor's cutting remarks and how they made her question her worth. Then she chronicled the journey that followed, the courage it took to speak up, the support she received from her husband, and the incredible changes that rippled through the hospital because of her bravery. By the time she reached the end, tears streamed down her face, not from sadness but from awe at how far she'd come. Her husband found her like that the next morning, curled up on the couch with the journal resting on her lap. "You okay?" he asked softly, sitting beside her. She nodded, smiling through her tears. "I'm more than okay," she replied. "I just realized something. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us, what we've built together." Weeks later, the suspended doctor received a response to his letter. It wasn't what he expected. Instead of rejection, the hospital invited him to attend a meeting, not as an employee but as someone seeking understanding. The invitation came with no promises, only an opportunity to listen and learn. Though terrified, he accepted. Walking into the hospital again felt surreal. Everything looked familiar yet different, like stepping into a dream where the rules had changed. The administrator greeted him warmly but firmly, introducing him to a group of staff members involved in the diversity training program. Over coffee, they shared stories of their own struggles with bias and privilege, creating space for him to reflect without judgment. It wasn't easy. Some conversations stung, forcing him to confront truths he'd rather avoid. Yet, amid the discomfort, he found glimmers of hope. These people weren't perfect, they admitted as much, but they were committed to doing better. And for the first time in years, he wanted to join them. In the weeks that followed, the hospital launched a new initiative, a peer mentoring program pairing seasoned professionals with those working to overcome past mistakes. To everyone's surprise, the suspended doctor became one of the first participants. Under the guidance of a compassionate mentor, he started volunteering at community clinics, focusing on underserved populations. Slowly but surely, he began rebuilding, not his career necessarily, but his sense of self-worth. As for the woman, her baby arrived on a crisp autumn morning, filling the delivery room with cries of joy. Holding her newborn for the first time, she felt overwhelmed by love and gratitude. Outside, leaves swirled in the breeze, painting the world in shades of gold and red, a fitting backdrop for new beginnings. Her husband snapped photos, capturing every precious moment. Later, as they settled into their quiet hospital room, she turned to him and smiled. "Remember when I thought this place was just another building?" she said softly. "Now it feels like home." And it did. For her family, and for countless others whose lives had been touched by the ripple effects of standing up for what was right. The journey wasn't over, but that was the beauty of it. Change wasn't a destination, it was a path, winding endlessly toward a brighter future.